Okay, our next speaker is Peter Murphy. Peter is an Associate Professor of Communications and also the Director of the Social Aesthetics Unit at Monash University, which I know some of you are involved with. He's written several books and co-authored books, so he knows about collaboration, on creativity in the global knowledge economy, on global creation and the dialectic of romanticism, a critique of modernism, and amongst other books. And his paper today is called Combinations and Collaborations as the Mirror of Creation, the Case of Jasper Johns.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. I just put up one of Jasper John's images there, just as an echo of the previous conversation about using images in artworks, and perhaps there'd actually be traces within this paper of a similar theme. The other trace as well to reflect upon as a way of framing the introduction of the paper is Ken's comments this morning about Brownian motion and the importance of Einstein's paper on Brownian motion. That's also, you will find, echoed in the paper today. Okay, I'll jump backwards and forwards with these images as I go through. Okay, great art. Great art is marked by emphatic individual styles, from Titian to Jasper Johns, Van Gogh to Frank Stella. The individuality of major works of art and leading visual artists is unmistakable. We do not need to be told that a painting is by the hand of Rembrandt or Jackson Pollock. We can see that at a glance. The individual style of a great artist is difficult to miss. Such styles can be copied, parodied and caricatured. The irony is that what is most individual is also most generic. It translates easily into a type that can be imitated. The paradox of great art is that it is the imitable inimitable. That paradox is further underscored by the fact that such art, individualised as it is more often than not deeply shaped by collaboration. That which is most emphatically individual frequently bears the impress of the collective milieu, relationships and projects that populate the background experience of the working artist. Serious artists, without question, are self-possessed. They are driven by singular visions of what to create and how to create. Yet often they enter into relationships with partners, collaborators, aiders and abettors, affinity groups, milieu and muses that are indispensable to their work. Part, but only part of this, has to do with the artistic ego. All egos, not least of all artistic egos, have vulnerabilities. That is to be human. Collaborations of different kinds aid, boost and enable fragile egos. Artists who are starting out on their life's work or who have reached an impasse need support. The same applies to intellectuals and indeed to human beings in general. While there is some truth in the old existential view, well summed up by Jean-Paul Sartre, that hell is other people, it is also an indubitable truth that we need other people. But whatever anxieties and weaknesses haunt artists, collaborators and muses, whatever anxieties and weaknesses haunt artists, collaborators and muses are not simply props for threatened egos or instruments for the ego gratification of great artists. Certainly there are plenty of examples of the monstrous or tyrannical artistic ego. But just as importantly, and in fact more importantly, collaboration is a mirror of creation. Collaboration, which can take on an infinite range of forms, has structural features that are akin to the nature of creation itself. Collaboration therefore functions as a preparation and a foil for creation. It is a visible acting out of the inward creative process. Collaboration is an outward experimental testbed for a combinatory process that is intrinsic to the inner nature of creation. Through collaborative relations, the combinatory process of creation is started, restarted, adapted, and evolved. Let's have another image here. Probably another stolen image, or several stolen images. I don't know, those artists stealing. Creation is an unlikely phenomenon. In the act of creation, things that do not normally belong together are brought into creation. The startling nature of such conjunctions lends artistic works their aura of intense individuality. Works of the imagination stand out. We register them as being sharply distinct from ordinary works of art and everyday events, even when works of imagination celebrate the ordinary and the everyday. In fact, at every turn, such works do the opposite of what they seem to be doing. Thus, while we apprehend these works as distinctive and as set apart from the quotidian, a large part of their power has to do with the imagination's capacity to draw things together as opposed to set things apart. The power of the imagination is synthetic rather than analytic. It unites, integrates and unifies what we normally think of as being in opposition. Where other mental functions, such as that of critical judgment, draw distinctions, the imagination makes connections. What the imagination produces, our critical faculties judge. Not every connection that the imagination makes works, but those that do, especially those that are audacious and unusual, startle our faculty of judgment. In doing that, in creating connections between what is normally disconnected, the imagination produces bold syntheses that are perceived to be, and are critically judged as, individual, outstanding, distinctive and unique. Such mental operations, both the critical analytic type and the imaginative synthetic type, are mirrored in the world. We rehearse and act out in the external world both critical demarcations and synthetic unions. Artistic lives are torn between these two poles, as are human lives in general. We habitually draw demarcation lines and then search for ways of overstepping or passing through those lines and boundaries. We cannot escape this double movement. Sometimes it is tragic and sometimes it is comic. The artistic ego and artistic identity is partly fuelled by critical demarcation. We are who we are in part because our ego has boundaries. What we identify with, for example, artistic or intellectual identifications, are discrete, demarcated and bounded forms or entities. A strong artistic ego is separated and separable from others. The works produced by that artist have distinctive characteristics. They are critically judged as unique, original, singular, as having a signature style, and so on. At the same time, some artists enter into collaborations and partnerships with other artists. These are relationships of relative equality. They are different from cases of rampant ego, where an artist dominates, uses and abuses others who become the means to the end of an uncontainable artistic ego. Collaborations require boundaries to be stepped over and yet upheld and reinforced at the same time. This is not easy, and collaborations do not always work. Indeed, sometimes they fail miserably. So why bother with them? The The answer to this question is that collaboration is an outward expression of the inner process of creation. Artists rehearse creation through collaboration. Collaboration is not the only way an artist rehearses or prepares the creative process. Some artists do not collaborate and yet are unquestionably creative. Yet for others, collaboration is an important and even indispensable way in which they initiate acts of creation or re-energise themselves when inspiration has been lost. Modes of collaboration vary enormously. They can be ongoing, periodic, or occasional. They can occur with other artists, with technicians and managers, or with friends and lovers. Collaboration is not of one kind, sort, or type. It is difficult in many cases to establish what exactly the collaborator or helpmate contributes to a specific work or project. This is because the contribution is often intangible, emotional, or spiritual in nature. Yet, even if it is intangible, it is essential. It is crucial because it is a rehearsal or an acting out of the process of creation. It is a warm-up for the imagination. It is this because collaboration is to human relationships what combination is to the act of imagination. In the act of imagination, there is a fusion or union between individual elements. In collaboration, there is a fusion or union between individual persons. Now, let me just go back for a second here. We've all seen these images. I love this one in particular, I have to say. My favourite. Let's see. I think that's the one I want. Sorry. Here we are. You can read the text. I'm not going to read the text now. To understand this better, let's look at a particular case, that of the American painter Jasper Johns. Johns was a frequent collaborator in his early and mid-career years. And that's biographical fact. The earliness of it's going to be important. His first collaborative work was with Robert Rauschenberg. Like many outstanding artists before him, Johns flourished in a tiny milieu of exceptional talent. In New York City of the 1950s and 1960s, Johns formed close ties with Rauschenberg, John Cage and Merce Cunningham, all of them major figures of the period, or at least they became major figures anyway. Cage and Johns created the foundation for contemporary performance arts in 1963. From 1967 until 1980, Johns was artistic advisor to the Merce Cunningham Dance Company. In that later capacity, he worked with Frank Stella on Scramble in 1967, with Andy Warhol on Rainforest in 1968, with Robert Morris on Canfield in 1969, and with Bruce Nauman on Tread in 1970. The Warhol collaboration, as Cunningham relates, happened this way, and the little explanation we've got up on screen there. Johns adapted Marcel Duchamp's large glass as the decor for Walk Around Time in 1968. And Cunningham tells this story. This is how artistic collaborations, as we know, happens at over dinner table conversations. Johns also did the set for Second Hand in 1970 and Land Rover in 1972, and in 1973 designed Cunningham's ballet for the Paris Opera Un Jour ou Deux, with music by John Cage. Okay. The interweaving of these characters was summed up in a performance by John Cage in Los Angeles at UCLA, University of California at Los Angeles, in September 1987 for an opening of an exhibition of the Samuel Beckett Jasper Johns collaboration Fizzles. Marjorie Perloff, who was there, recounts that Cage's performance included 3 short mesiosics on the name Jasper Johns, including this one that appeared in Cage's Empty Works in 1979 under the title Song. I rather like this one. The Johns Beckett collaboration, by accounts, wasn't that successful. In fact, it seems like it lived up to its name, Fizzles, and seems to mark the winding down of Johns's collaborative impulse. But this impulse had done its work, and what that work is exactly is the question that remains. The significance of collaboration is not just two or more people working together and producing an outcome. That has variable results. In some media, working together is optional. In other media, like dance for example, it is more or less obligatory. Given that Johns's principal medium was painting, collaboration was optional. But looked at from the angle of the imagination, it was a necessary option. Collaboration has a strong elective affinity with imagination. It is a preparation or exercise for the imagination. With the passage of time, as artists fully mature, such preparation becomes less necessary, or may become less necessary. Collaboration is a trigger to start or restart the imagination. It acts as a sympathetic lever for it. This is possible because collaboration and imagination share features in common. Both unite different frames of reference. Collaboration unites differing ambitions, temporalities, work rhythms, goals, locations, styles and media. Artistic creation unites differing forms, shapes, patterns, materials, concepts, images, styles and media. The act of synthesis is a metaphor of creation. The act of creation draws together what is normally set asunder. Artistic distinctiveness is the fruit of paradoxical, highly individualised, collective acts of creation. These works are singular and yet a type. They are the works of a signature, a name, inimitable, and yet a kind, a category, a style, and eminently imitable. Herein also lies the conundrum of collaboration. It is collective, yet individual, hostile to stereotyping, but generative of creative typologies. Creative collaborations are driven by friendships between personalities who are often not noted for their friendly nature. We recognise this, do we? It is precisely these contradictions, as long as they are mastered, that make collaboration and creation productive. Take again the case of Jasper Johns. His work reaches maturity at the same time he is drawn into the collaborative intermedial world of Cunningham's dance company. Dance as an art form synthesises theatre, choreography, movement, music and set design into one. To do this, it relies on a large number of creative collaborators. The work of a painter is a lonely one compared with an art company. Yet the demands of creation in solitude nonetheless bear a distinct resemblance to the task typical of the art company, of having to integrate multiple media and personalities. In the art company, as in the company of artists, collaboration is an analogue of creation. Both rely on combination. The distinctiveness of John's work rests on forms of intermedial synthesis that parallel the multi-medial and interdisciplinary nature of the art ensemble. John's first major work, which we've already seen, Flag, 1954-55, contains visual, tactile and textual elements. The traditional oil painting on cloth, the encaustic and beeswax texture, and the newspaper fragments in the work's collage. Painted bronze, which is the image we have up here, from 1960, unites the work of the sculptor with the oil medium of the painter. The effect is uncanny. It appeals to the brain's faculty of synesthesia. Map, 1963, is a visual analogue of this doubling effect. Johns' map of the United States land mass blends imperceptibly into the surrounding ocean. Vigorous grey-blue brushstrokes unite land and sea. The work is a United States of the senses, with encaustic texture, textual collage and stenciling, and the visual combination of anonymous grey, striking swatches of primary colour and secondary colours that emerge like illumination from under the grey surfaces. Good Time Charlie, 1961, combines objects, a ruler and a can, I wonder if they're copyrightable, with a painted encaustic surface, the paintwork blending smeared pigments and brushstrokes. Works around the same time. Devices, 1961-62, that one. And quick flip through here. Periscope, the Hart Crane painting from 1963. Adds stencil letters to this fusion. This one I particularly like, I have to say. But, where is it now? Here we are. Yeah. All right. Misnamed this. Anyway, sorry. Fool's House, the Wittgenstein-inspired work from 1962, unites oil on canvas with domestic objects, a cup and a broom. The two dimensions of the painting surface merge with the three dimensions of the quotidian objects. The sweep of the dangling broom is a beautiful visual metaphor of the artist's brushstroke. 1964's Watchman, I can't find that image. All right. Back. I've got them in the wrong order and the wrong titles. I must have been really awake when I was doing this. 1964's Watchman unites a sculptural piece, a cast of a thigh and calf seated on a chair with oil on canvas. 1972's Untitled. Let's see if I've got that image. I seem to have that. Okay. 1972's Untitled marries oil, encaustic and collage with flagstone and cross-hatching patterns and the subtle interweaving of symmetry and asymmetry. 1982's In the Studio combines a painted sculptural body part, a hand and a segment of arm, a two-dimensional sketch of the same, a hanging strip of wood protruding from the canvas, a cross-hatching pattern and a smeary, blurry drizzle pattern. 1983's Racing Thoughts divides the painting surface into a symmetrical bifold, one half dominated by cross-hatched and wood-grain patterns, the other half a domestic wall transformed by patches of painterly colour, with the painting surface as a whole turned into a background overlain with a foregrounded series of imaginary objects. His imaginary foreground includes images of the painter's dealer, the Mona Lisa, a bathtub, a skull and crossbones poster, stencil words, Barnett Newman's 1961 lithograph Untitled, and a commemorative ceramic pot. Now, heading towards the end here, Racing Thoughts culminates and tacitly questions John's spirit of combination. If creativity is the act of drawing disparate elements together into a unity, it is nonetheless notably difficult to achieve this in practice. Failure ends in eclecticism, pastiche, confusion and incoherence. It is both necessary and at the same time hard to create a singular artistic style based on multiple elements. In Racing Thoughts, Johns skirts the limits of this. The work teases us with the implied question of how far we can push the multiplicity of an artwork before it destroys its own unity. That there is a limit is suggested by the fact that after the era of racing thoughts, the impulse to multiplicity becomes more subdued in Johns' work, just as in parallel step his collaborative impulse declines. The more subdued style culminates in the late 1990s with the beginning of the series of paintings on the theme of the catenary, the geometric curve that is an idealised representation of the hanging chain. This reaches an exquisite zenith in catenary Henri Monnier in 2000. This work has the familiar Johns' style of an encaustic painting on canvas with objects, yet it is characterised by an almost neoclassical symmetry and equilibrium. The catenary has the feel of suspension, an uncanny state of affairs between rest and motion. In the catenary series, the dangling objects in Johns' earlier work have been transformed into a metaphysical state that appears to bend without compression. This is a metaphor of the ideal state of collaboration and creation. It summons up an impossible condition. This condition implies both weightiness and weightlessness at the same time. For the serious artist, this is the ideal state of art. It is also what collaboration promises, the miraculous state of weighty matters transformed into feather lightness, the uncanny mix of gravity and grace. Collaboration in reality never really delivers that. Egos and circumstances invariably get in the way. Goals, ambitions and energies never quite match. We do not especially remember Johns for his work with Warhol or Stella. But that hardly matters, for the metaphysical promise of collaboration provides an enduring image of what might be. This continues to play on the mind and the soul of the artist long after collaboration is done with. It eventually finds fruition in that handful of marvellous works that forever leave their mark on us. Thank you.
Peter, you made the point that. Peter, you made the point that about unfriendly personalities.
Yes.
What do you? Tell us a bit. Draw that out a little bit more.
Well, my reading of the history of collaboration is that the superficial stories of X collaborates with Y and produces Z work, and it's a wonderful story. More closely observed, and these relationships are frequently filled with tension, and they come to a bad end quite often. Two things underline that. A points to frequently the difficulty of collaboration. It's not universal, but it's a commonplace. The collaborations exist for a period of time and they come to an end. And I think that the comment's also a reflection on that artistic personalities, particularly gifted artistic personalities, are frequently difficult characters, not uncommonly. And part of the difficulty arises because serious work or great work is very demanding, and it particularly requires, as I said at the beginning of the paper, a particular vision. It is stamped with something that is singular, and yet the paradox of collaboration is that collaboration requires the combination of elements. On the one hand, maybe personality elements coming together, but the point of the paper is to say that this is also the nature of artwork, or intellectual creation generally requires the combination of elements per se. And that is inherently paradoxical, difficult, and in personality terms, one may both seriously and flippantly refer to that as the tension between the friendly and the unfriendly.
There is a question.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Question really about who the other is in a collaboration, which I guess is one of the kind of niggling questions that might arise during a lot of the papers, in the sense that, in fact, to invoke a pragmatist who Ken referred to earlier, George Herbert Mead, Mead famously distinguished between the concrete other, who I think we've been predominantly talking about, that is, other individuals whose hand or ideas or labours may also be present in a work of art. But I wonder with Jasper Johns, I'm also thinking about people like Rauschenberg, whether there is also the presence of some kind of generalised other, and which is the larger culture, but also the discrete symbolism of that larger culture. And, the flag, images from popular culture almost acquire a kind of agency of their own. And I'm just wondering, does collaboration always have to be with a concrete personal other? Or is there a sense in which it would also make sense to talk about collaboration with a broader culture and the symbols of that culture?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that I've done a number of papers on particular artistic personalities related to collaboration. And I think increasingly the conclusion I've drawn is that often really collaboration can be seen as a general a metaphor for the creative process, irrespective of whether there is a literal collaboration going on between one person, me, and another person, you. And in fact, I think some of the most interesting collaborations are to do with individuals who maybe simply don't get on with other people and don't have a particular history, a track record of working with other people, of having common creations in that sense. And yet the creative process, it seems to me, is driven by, I often think of Mead in this respect, because Mead talks about an I and a me, and uses this type of language, and that I think the most interesting human personalities have an I and a me. And the me, or the can, in your terms, can in part be described as a social other, or some kind of other, a symbolic other. So that within the most interesting creative personalities are a double act. And whether that double act is a literal thing of a husband and wife artistic partnership, two artists working together for the usual period is sort of 8 or 10 years, and then they fall out of good terms, or whether it is simply an individual soul for whom the tension between the I and the me, the self and the social other, or whatever, is the driving force of the artistic of the act of creation. And that tension and relationship and collaboration between the two, and it might be between the existential and the social in the terms that you talk about, becomes in a sense the wellspring, to use a romantic expression, for the act that generates the creative form.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to add, the Bach would be, God.
Yeah, sure.
You don't get any more up than that.
No, you don't get any more than that.
Yeah,
Is it?
it's also it's one.
Yeah.
I'll put that in here.
Yeah.
I think I have to take issue with your essentially negative conception of collaboration. It seems to you talk in a very general way about
Sure.
it, and you're lumping together occasional collaborations like Jonathan Walpole with long-term collaborations, and you're talking about these massive egos that almost can't be contained in the same room,
Yeah.
that somehow come together, and the best results seem to be through the most fraught, difficult connections between artists. And I actually don't agree with you at all. We actually started working collaboratively as artists. We deliberately wanted to confuse the idea of a gendered reading, whether it be masculine or feminine, and we also wanted to take the theme of cooperation to that ultimate commitment of a lifetime collaboration. We don't see it as ending after 8 or 10 years. We've been collaborating since 1989, so I think I can speak with some authority here. And we feel that embedded in our work is this level of trust and actually giving agency to each of us. We both have the right. We do separate talks on our collaborative practice, and we can both say whatever we want about it. We can both do whatever we want within it. For us, it is a free space of generating ideas, and I think some of that came through in the talk. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit but I can see that it was more nuanced as you got through the paper. But when you talk about collaboration in the general sense, it actually, you're lumping apples and oranges and onions all together, all different commodities. And I think that maybe you need to be more precise. And you also need to allow that some artists would work with a very idealistic goal of working together, and actually that's something that we always get normally in our talks about our work. Someone will ask, do you fight? And actually we don't fight about the work.
No.
We fight about how it
Yeah, of course. Of course.
and I'm sorry, I don't mean to be agitated about this, because I actually thought that your paper was very subtle as well. And I think that those subtleties were
Yeah.
and the models that you talk about really interest me.
Yeah.
But what I want to say is that it's actually for us, and I'm really talking as a case study. So I'm like the living case study.
Yeah.
It's actually a way where we can generate ideas constantly. We don't have to work in that sort of vacuum where you get stuck.
No.
Because there's always these different energies going on.
Yeah.
We actually now come up with often the same ideas,
Yeah.
which is uncanny. And I'm not trying to be romantic about it. I'm just telling you actually how it works.
Yeah.
And this is an opportunity to have the case study in the room and poke and prod that and think about how it works.
Yeah, no.
So
Yeah.
I would actually assert that maybe you need to slip in to your narrative, the general narrative about collaboration, and your reference to key figures
Sure.
that you also quite, and you've obviously done a lot of work in this area. I think you need to slip in an almost utopian aspect. There is an impulse there to work together, and you do talk about that. But I actually think that that is something that people always read into our work. The fact that we paint together, for some reason the photographs not a problem, but when you've got the touch of the artist's hand on the canvas, and two of them together, and you actually can't tell who did what, that's about on some level, it's about something quite idealistic. And I'm not trying to make great claims. And I also believe that when we started working together, it was a desire to actually not have the ego rule it. And that was why we said we couldn't do separate works, because that would be about ego. And our idea, and it also comes from our profound engagement with, say, Buddhist ideas and beliefs, is to actually dissolve the ego and put that aside and see what space we can create. This is just another
Look.
I hope my respect for your paper comes through my slightly agitated intervention.
There's fundamentally no disagreement there at all.
Started maybe more negative.
Yeah, no. Look, I think you're true. I think that's true. And I mean, there were some flippant asides during the paper.
Sometimes irony works.
So that's right. And sometimes my irony works and doesn't, according to as Adrian could well attest to. He could stand in negative defence of that proposition. Having said that, I think. Can I just pick up the final point? Because I think that's absolutely essential. Because, look, there's no question. I mean, 15 minutes or 20 minutes to talk about a huge spectrum of things. I frankly own up and admit this incredible range of things, and I'm trying to concentrate that. But I think one of the things that's crucial, and in a way it's the opposite of where I started, but it's actually, you pick up on that, but it's absolutely quite true, that overcoming the ego, and there are really, quite interesting metaphors from all different kinds of traditions, including the Buddhist tradition and so on, are quite helpful in sort of understanding that. I think often the collaborations that fail precisely don't overcome the ego aspect, and I think as a general rule of creation, period, be it artistic creation, literature creation, creation X, Y, and Z, that great creation comes out of, in a sense, overcoming the ego, and whether it's two working together or working singular and so on. I think that's a really fundamental somehow about great work, and this comes back partly to Ken's thing, is there ain't much great work. I mean, it really is quite elusive. It's difficult to say. Sometimes it appears in surprise. You think, yes, how did it come about? And I think it's even true, each of us individually, when we look at our own work, and we know that there's good bits, there's average bits, and there's some really good stuff there. And you think, what explains the really good stuff? And I think that's crucial, and it applies to individuals, but it doubly applies to when you've got two there, the dyad. What actually makes it possible to just put those ego drives aside and actually concentrate. And one of the things one of the answers to this, by the way, I think is the work. Okay, that the work supersedes the ego. The work is actually more important. Whatever style of work it is, it's the commitment to the work, the absolute unmitigated commitment to the work is actually the thing that helps to put aside the ego stuff.
And that's the thing, in the studio, producing the work.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whether you're one or several. The ego is not what's driving it. It's the struggle with the action to produce that remarkable object. Yeah,
it's a remarkable object. And one further comment on this is that where that becomes trickier is where we've got two artists or collaborators literally working on the work. There's the object overcomes it. They're actually the producers in a sense. I quite like that. The term, those metaphors about production and so on. It's where you get the collaborations where one is producing the work and another is kind of helping, and the helping thing is important. And whether it's the model of the muse or the sort of the helpmate, or there's a whole variety of different sorts of things. There, that becomes the work turns into the project, and the project may become the force that overcomes the egoistic and the potential for ego to get in the way, but then it's less, in a sense, I think it's a less powerful medium for overcoming that than the work or the object itself. But that's just an observation about these things. Yeah.
Sorry, we're really kind of getting very close to, we only have half an hour for lunch. So I wonder if you could bring that point up with Peter maybe over lunch, because we'll start again at 1:30. Sorry to interrupt you. And
No, thanks, okay.